Alright, so in this video, we're going to go through reported speech, el estilo indirecto, which is a rather common exercise in selectividad. So I'm going to go through the presentation that I made for my segundo de bachillerato students. So let's start with this first slide. It says, tense-wise, we always go one step back. I'm sure that your teacher has already told you that you have to go one step back. There are certain exceptions, but for the most part, this is true like maybe a 95% of the time. So, what does that imply? It implies that if you have a sentence in direct speech that's in the present tense, you gotta go to the past tense. The present continuous turns into the past continuous. The present perfect turns into the past perfect. The present perfect continuous turns into the past perfect continuous. The past simple turns into the past perfect, and the past perfect can't go back any further, so it doesn't change. It's still past perfect. Past continuous turns into past perfect continuous. Will turns into would. Will be verb ing is would be verb ing. Can is could. May is might. And must and have to turn into had to. Then I wrote this, basically it's the same thing, but I am using passive structures. So it can happen that you find a direct speech sentence that's in the passive voice, so you have to turn it into the passive voice. But in this case, we have is hired, was hired, is being attacked, was being attacked, and so on and so forth. I did it with a few more tenses. All right. So next thing that you have to bear in mind, however, we don't go one step back when the reporting verb is in the present tense or when it is an objective truth. So, Mary says, I love soup. In this case, the reporting verb, this verb right here, is in the present tense. Therefore, what she is saying doesn't have to be altered. It would be, Mary says that she loves soup. The tense is not altered, but of course, what she is saying should be altered because I am talking about Mary in the third person and she is talking about herself in the first person. London is the capital of Great Britain, she pointed out. In this case, we have an objective truth. Therefore, she pointed out that London is the capital of Great Britain. You know, we should, as much as we should go through this sort of example, and bear in mind that they are not very common in selectividad exams. So maybe you should know about this, but it's not that common that it would happen this way. Personal pronouns and positive adjectives may change depending on who is speaking. For example, I forgot to take my briefcase, Jim said. I'm talking about Jim in this indirect speech. If I am talking about Jim, a proper noun, I'm going to talk about that person in the third person. All right. So I would say that he instead of I, and that his briefcase. I would talk about his briefcase, not my briefcase, because I'm talking about him in the third person singular. I want you to take the car to the garage. Next Friday, he told his wife, would turn into he told his wife he wanted her to take the car to the garage the following Friday. Pronouns, so you might need to brush upon. We have I, my, you, he, him, she, her, it, we, you, they. All right, I mean these ones because some of my students don't still know them, or rather don't use them naturally, and so you need to know them because depending on where they are in the sentence, if they are after a preposition or if they follow a verb, you might need to use them. And since we are going to have to change the pronouns and the possessive adjectives, yeah, you better know them by heart. You should go back and study them if you don't already know them. Then we have time and place expressions that change. Now is then, today and tonight is that night or that day. Yesterday is the day before or the previous day. Tomorrow is the next day, the following day. The next week, the next month is the following week, the following month. Last week, last month is the previous week, the previous month. A week, month ago is the week, month before. Here is there. This is that. These is those. Remember these, the demonstratives. Some of my students don't know how to use them, and they are super useful. And for this sort of grammar exercise that you're going to find in selectividad, you better know them. So this is another, table that you should learn by heart if you want to pass this exam in this exercise. All right, so we have to turn the following sentence into reported speech. We have, my cousins have often visited France, Joanna pointed out. So in this case, I would throw this question. I would ask my students to answer this, and the answer would be, Joanna pointed out that, we can omit that one, her cousins had often visited France. So in this case, we have, she says she's using the possessive adjective of the first person. We gotta turn it into her, and then we have often visited, which is a present perfect, which should turn into a past perfect. So it would be, Joanna pointed out her cousins had often visited France. I forgot to take my briefcase. Jim said, this is of course the previous example, so it would be, Jim said that he had forgotten to take his briefcase. When can we omit that? We can omit this conjunction after verbs like learned, discovered, found out, knew, felt, through, say, and tell. So if we have say and tell here, we can say that we can omit it most of the time in this exercise. We shouldn't care that much about it. We can't omit it after verbs like reply and shout. But for the most part, as you can see, these sort of sentences are not going to appear in a selectividad exam. Therefore, for the most part, you can omit it. All right. Reporting commands and orders. Reportando órdenes. In direct speech, orders are expressed in the imperative form. In indirect speech, however, we have to make certain changes. So the imperative form becomes an infinitive form. For example, he said, stay here, would be, he told us to stay here. So in this case, we have an imperative, and in here we have an infinitive. The reporting verb changes, as I said before, to tell, order, or instruct, ask, beg, invite, warn. We could use any of these verbs to basically report a command or an order. He said, be quiet. He told us. He ordered us. He begged us. He warned us. He invited us. He instructed us to be quiet. All right, turn the following sentences in reported speech. Please don't leave. He begged her. It would be, he begged her not to leave. In this case, we have an imperative. Therefore, we understand that it is an order, and in order to report it, we need an infinitive form. Don't smoke in my office, the boss said. The boss told him not to smoke in his or her office. Reporting questions, yes, no questions. We gotta bear in mind that there is no subject verb inversion. This is a mistake that most of my students make all the time. Did you speak to John last night? He asked. It would be he asked if or whether I had spoken to John the night before. So it's not had I spoken to John the night before. This is a mistake that most of my students make when they do these sort of exercises. It would be I had spoken. So you need the subject first and then you write the verb. Of course, there is no question mark. Do you understand me? The teacher asked us if we understood him, and no question mark at the end. If or whether follow the reporting verb. Have you been ill? My friend asked. My friend wondered if or whether. So this would be the reporting verb, and then afterwards to introduce a question, we could use if or we could use whether, whichever we prefer. Alright, turn the following sentence into reported speech. We have, is he sleeping? My mother asked. Would be, my mother asked if, whether he was sleeping. So we have a present continuous. It's right here. It's a past continuous. We have a question. So we have introduced it with if or whether. If it was a question, therefore the reporting verb was asked. Since this was in the past, we went one step back. Will it rain tomorrow? He asked. He wanted to know. He asked if whether it would rain the following day. Reporting requests. We use verbs. The verbs ask, demand, beg, request, etc. Dad, don't forget to send the email, please, Jody said. Jody asked her dad not to forget to send the email. So as you see, we have asked. I could have used demanded, begged, requested for this reported sentence. We omit the word please. We don't need to use it. This please is implied in the reporting verb. John, don't open the window, please. I said, I asked, I requested, or I begged John not to open the window. Now, suggestions can be expressed in different ways. They can be expressed with let's go to the theater, she said. Why don't we go to the theater, she said. Shall we go to the theater? Why not go to the theater? In indirect speech, we use the reporting verb suggest, followed by a gerund, which is the most frequent structure. Let's go to the theater, she said, would be she suggested going to the theater. Or a that clause, which is less different and more prone to making mistakes. Shall we go to the theater? She said. She suggested that we go to the theater, or that we should go to the theater. And this would be the end of my presentation.